Hi, Bhargav. Hi, Uday and Basil. Thanks for joining. Let's just do our quick whiz around Asia Pacific to brief each other. For Southeast Asia, indeed for East Asia Pacific today, we've covered off on one assessed event, 6 other developments in North Asia, 26 other developments in Southeast Asia, and 13 other developments in Australasia and Pacific. For reasons of brevity, I'll basically just leave Australia and Pacific Islands out because most clients aren't too concerned or don't have a big footprint there. The assessed event today was in North Asia, where 17 people were injured after a suspect stabbed people on the Tokyo train. This is after another 2 people were injured on October 15th. And of course, remembering in 1995, there was a sarin gas attack where 14 people were killed and basically 5 coordinated attacks were conducted. So generally, Japan's very, very safe, but obviously these kind of sporadic moments of public risk occur. Elsewhere in Southeast Asia, clashes broke out in central Jakarta, right in the area where the famous Shangri-La Hotel in Jakarta is. And police arrested several people after the clash. In Papua, in Nabire Regency, a classic piece of security force competence. 2 police officers were arrested for selling weapons to the West Papuan National Liberation Army. They were also found in possession of the cash. Also in Papua, there were suspected members of the TPNPB, although suspected perhaps should read, it is almost certain, conducted offensives in Sugapa, basically attacking and creating arson and burning down various facilities in true Indonesian PR backtracks. On the weekend, they basically said that the flight, beg your pardon, the air navigation office was burnt. The authority itself came out and said they'll be able to operate from another facility, and then they all backtracked and said there was no damage, it was all good, though we know from sources on the ground in Sugapa it was not all good, so the cover-up's typical. There's a lot of Machiavellian theories on what's going on, but fundamentally breaking all those away, the military always deploys and then they pull out, and as soon as they pull out, guess what the guerrilla movement does? They pull in and conduct some mayhem. In Myanmar, it's been a fairly active period. Firstly, from a commercial perspective, the wonderfully ethical Adani Ports said it's going to divest from its joint venture project with a military-owned Myanmar Economic Corporation. And it said it's basically going to do that because of the sanctions imposed by the US and the UK governments on military-controlled companies. Note, their own business ethics or the right thing was not mentioned. Also in Myanmar, around 160 houses were burned down in Patlang Township in the Chin State. Security forces allegedly fired artillery, and that was basically a retaliation for the killing of a soldier 2 or 3 days ago. Also, the Your Defence Force in the Mugway region announced on October 30 that it will launch retaliatory attacks against the military, so the usual tit for tat, and that's after the military burned down hundreds of houses in Patlang Township in the Chin State. The Philippines also fairly active. Security forces killed the suspected leader of the Dawa Islamiyah and his wife at Talian village in Maguindanao province. I won't go into the details of that. Clients can read up on it or people can reach out to us to be placed on our membership. Security forces also killed the suspected leader of the new People's Army in the Northeast Mindanao Division. And in a more uplifting news, Singapore has basically been allowed to travel into Australia from November 21 for tourists. Also on some good news in COVID, Thailand opened up today for 63 countries. You can still go to Thailand if you're not from those 63 countries. You'll just have to do a 7-day quarantine as opposed to from those 63 countries, a one-night stay, have a PCR test before you go, a PCR test on arrival, and once it's good to go, you're good to go anywhere in Thailand. Of course, you have to be doubly vaccinated from those 63 countries. On a more somber note, thousands of anti-government protesters gathered in the Ratchaprasong intersection yesterday. So things are heating up there, and they were basically asking for the government and monarchy to drop the lay majeste rules. Good luck with that. The rival gangs in Thon Mamuang district in Phetchaburi province, which is the province north of Prachuap Khiri Khan, which is where Hua Hin is, and south of Bangkok, so halfway between there on the top northwest of the Siam Bay. Basically rival gangs decided to meet up and have a bit of an argument, and then it elevated into a shootout. Basically, there's been 4 men arrested, but it's going to continue to be dug into. Vietnam's also said it's going to look at opening up, and it's going to release a COVID-friendly come-in plan on the 5th of November. North Asia also, I guess, dominated by Japan, not only from the subway craziness of the man dressed in the Joker suit from the Batman show, but also the ruling Liberal Democratic Party retained a majority in the lower house, along with their ally, the Komodo. They got an absolute majority in the House. This is being played down by the media that wants to build something into it, but it was a very, very positive result for the party. Though they lost a few seats compared to previous elections, they're still in a very, very strong position. And the Western media, for some reason, just doesn't want to say that. I mean, if that was held in the UK or Australia, they'd be advocating a very strong majority government in its own right, along with its long-term coalition partner. They're in a very strong position. Over to you, chaps. Who's next?
I'll go ahead, Paul, if you don't mind.
Sure, mate.
So I'll be covering South Asia. It's been a relatively quiet weekend. I think more people have been concerned about the cricket that's going on. Pakistan beat Afghanistan and India lost to New Zealand. So that's been quite emotional for some of the people. But in South Asia, I mean, you've had more political violence in Bangladesh and anti-government protests in Pakistan over the weekend. There's one planned in Karachi tomorrow. That's more of the usual. I'd just like to take a second to talk about Pakistan, the government, and the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan.
Yes.
We had talked about them, I think, in the last session, and
Yes.
apparently the TLP and the government have come to an agreement. And from what it seems like, it's the government capitulating to the TLP again, because the government will take back the decision to declare TLP as a banned group, and it will allow it to join politics again and take cases and retract cases against TLP activists. So some are saying that, you know, once again, the TLP has kind of forced the government to its knees. And I think that's quite interesting because they have a very strong mobilization power. You can see their influence on the Pakistani government.
Yes.
Bhargav, would you like anything to add to that?
Yes, Uday. I mean, it's quite comical that all-powerful military-backed government of Imran Khan has to carve down to the demands of some ragtag group of Islamists called TLP. What happened to all the macho talk of the military in Pakistan? Of course, there is soft corner for Islamists, especially across the border in Afghanistan, but that equation is a lot more complicated because all the rumors and the controversies around the Pakistan government backing Taliban aside, Islamists within Pakistan itself, they are not really happy with the military-backed government, despite all the stereotypical descriptions of Imran Khan's government. The way I see the government is that they are happy as long as their power is not really challenged. Would you agree, Uday?
Yeah, definitely. And if I remember correctly, Imran Khan, while he was campaigning in 2017, he had supported the TLP's protests against the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz government. Right, Bhargav?
Exactly right. So as long as it suits their political convenience, they're all happy with it. The moment they challenge one's power, in this case, the military and the military-backed government of Imran Khan, they literally go on fire. So at least that's how I would see it. there. So
Thanks,
I
Bhargav.
guess we are on the same page there. So probably Basil can take it from here.
Yes, for sure, Bhargav. So it hasn't been quiet, especially in Africa this weekend. As we all know, there's a military seizure of power in Sudan. So the military clampdown in Sudan continues. There was a protest on Saturday, which was called March of the Millions. Hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets, especially in the cities of Khartoum and Omdurman. Clashes between security forces and protesters broke out, especially in those two cities, which led to 3 protesters killed and around 38 others were injured. The Central Committee of Sudanese Doctors issued a statement stating that around 15 protesters were killed and 245 others were injured during the protests that started since the military takeover on October 25. There's also something quite significant, is that the military is releasing all former ministers and security officials that were allied with the former ousted president Omar al-Bashir, which had an authoritarian rule on the government or on the country, we can say. At the same time, we can see that international, local, and regional organizations are trying to mediate in order to solve the political deadlock in the country. There was a new announcement by the United Nations Special Representatives Volker Perthes in Sudan. He managed to have negotiations with Prime Minister Abdullah Al-Hamdouk, which is currently under house arrest, and they had a proposal to resolve the 14-member Sovereign Council that included the military and civilian ministers. At the same time, replace it with a 3-member council that represents politicians, rebel groups, and the military. Over to another country, which is Uganda. It's apparent that there's a new Islamic insurgency in the country. There have been around 3 terror attacks in the past week. Over the weekend, a new attack happened in a village, but it was quite strange this time, because the attack happened on 2 children. These 2 children were handed a bomb which was shaped like an exotic jackfruit, and this bomb exploded while the children were playing. This is the 3rd terror attack in the country in 1 week. However, it's not similar to Al-Shabaab insurgency in the past. It is concerned more with the Islamic State, as the Islamic State claimed to be responsible for the recent attacks.
Thank
Over
you,
to you,
Basil.
Bhargav.
Europe has been quite busy over the weekend. There were protests, environmental protests in UK as well as Italy. G20 summit is happening in Rome. Over 7 or 8 labor unions converged. Most of them laid off workers of Alitalia, the former flag carrier of Italy, and another company called GKN Automotive. They took part in the protests. They basically urged G20 leaders to ensure the greenhouse gas emissions are down to 0 by 2025. That's quite optimistic. Otherwise, Rome is on high alert with more than 5,000 security personnel deployed to secure the G20 summit. In the UK, the financial district, the area is called Bank. Quite conveniently, the narrow streets of Bank were quite clogged with the climate change activists, later joined by Greta Thunberg, no less. And they were protesting in front of Bank of England as well as Standard Chartered. Paul, doesn't that sound familiar? Now, they were urging the banks to stop funding the fossil fuel industries to ensure there is some accountability on their part to ensure the greenhouse gas emissions are minimized. Going over to Germany, the labor union there has also been quite busy. Labor union Verdi, they called upon other labor unions to hold protests at 7 different Amazon locations in the country. They have planned the strike primarily to pressurize Amazon to stick to the plan what they have agreed upon. The retail sector as well as mail order industry has agreed upon with the labor unions. This is about pay gap within the industry. In France, the African politics has spilled over to Europe. More than 100 Sudanese people protested in Paris. This was against the coup which took place in Sudan, which Basel has been enlightening us about in the last 2 weeks. Paul, anything to add over these issues?
No, I think that'll wrap it up. That's given us all a good overview. Thanks, Bhargav. Thanks, chaps.
Paul, one more issue. In fact, I wanted Uday's input on this. There was a massive drug haul in Rotterdam in Netherlands. More than 4,000 kilograms of cocaine was seized. So there, you have lived in the Netherlands. Does it come as a surprise to you?
Well, I know Europe likes to party, so I'm not really surprised at
Especially
that.
Amsterdam.
Yeah. And from there, that's one of the main transit points to the rest of Europe, because they have a lot of inland trade through the rivers, and it goes to Germany, Spain, France. So it's not that surprising. And we have been seeing a lot of record-breaking drug hauls in the past few months, haven't we, Bhargav?
Yes, it happened in India as well. And this particular drug consignment came from Paraguay through Uruguay, and this was destined to Portugal. As Uday said, it kind of acts as a distribution point. The value was as high as $360 million. Paul, that's pretty much it from my end from Europe.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Look, I guess what we constantly have to look at is the irony of how many drug busts, because we're also seeing a massive amount of drug busts in Australia and also in Southeast Asia. And the stuff in Southeast Asia is obviously heading all around the globe. It's not just heading to Australia, though the Aussies very much Amsterdam-like in terms of sort of hobbies they have. Ironically, the world's making this big fuss about inflation, and it's all because of COVID-led supply chain limitations. But I suspect that this inflation and the COVID limitations on supply chain aren't going to last too much longer. So, Bhargav, has anyone got a view on that, or do you want to hold off for a couple of days and give me your views after you research it a little bit more?
Paul, I believe we need a few more numbers on our hands to comment on them, because there has been a recent spurt, yes, but we need to see much beyond these recent events. We need to track the volumes as well as the routes they are coming in. So probably we are better off to hold it until we have more numbers.
You're talking about drugs or supply chain?
Both, Paul, because the drugs and the volume of drugs as well as supply chains, they are symbiotic the way I see it. Yeah,
so good. Let's just keep building up our database on that, because I think it's going to be very interesting. But let's not just the biggest problem I see in the assessments that clients ask us to review is they go to one or two well-known media sources and base their assessment on thinking that Western media sources in English are objective and stable, whereas the opposite normally applies. We're seeing the Five Eyes in particular have a brilliant capacity to point at China's propaganda, yet if you look at the news in the American channels, English channels, Australian channels, I'm talking national broadcasters, it's often a replica, the same PR team, Central's coming up with it. And I think that this, supply chain limitations may be part of that, somewhat limited view. So let's just continue to look at these with fairly stringent and objective eyes, okay?
Certainly, Paul.
All right, chaps, thanks very much. Cheerio.
Thank you, Paul. See you.
Hi, Bhargav. Hi, Uday and Basil. Thanks for joining. Let's just do our quick whiz around Asia Pacific to brief each other. For Southeast Asia, indeed for East Asia Pacific today, we've covered off on one assessed event, 6 other developments in North Asia 26 other developments in Southeast Asia and 13 other developments in Australasia and Pacific. For reasons of brevity, I'll basically